Has anyone ever experienced sleep paralysis before? I tell you, it's one of the strangest, most fascinating, yet horrifying things you could ever go through. It's the feeling of being completely awake, your senses fully alert, yet unable to move a single muscle. Your body feels trapped, like it belongs to someone else, and your mind is screaming at you to act, but nothing happens. I had heard stories about it long before it happened to me, but nothing truly prepares you for the sensation. I only experienced it once, back when I was in college. That time of life was incredibly stressful. Finals week was approaching, and I was drowning in pressure. I wasn't sleeping much, surviving on little to no rest, and obsessively studying for every exam. The night before my last final, I remember staying up all night studying biology. My eyes were burning from exhaustion, and every page of my notes seemed to blur into the next. At some point, I finally decided to give in and sleep, but I don't remember exactly when I drifted off. It all became a haze and then blackness. The next thing I knew, I was lying in my bed, back in my room. Everything seemed normal at first, but then there was this odd haze in my perception, a fog over my awareness. I was awake, yet weak, as if my body refused to obey my commands. I tried to move my arms, my legs, anything, but they wouldn't respond. All I could do was move my eyes to look around the dim room. And then I saw her. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Standing dead center in my room, facing the bed, was a woman. She wore a black dress and held some long, unidentifiable objects. My heart raced as I desperately tried to call out, "Mom," but no sound came out. I was trapped inside my own body, frozen in fear. She came closer, kneeling down until her eyes met mine. And somehow, impossibly, it was my mother's face staring back at me. I tried again to say, "Mom," my lips trembling, but I remained silent, locked inside my paralysis. Then she stood up, walked toward the doorway, and vanished into the house. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, until suddenly my vision cleared and I could think clearly again. I sat up and jumped out of bed, screaming, "Mom," over and over. I ran down the hallway, calling for her frantically. A door opened and someone came to hug me. It wasn't her. It was my dad, telling me he missed her too. My mother had died only 3 weeks before. The experience was overwhelming, terrifying, and surreal. I lay awake for a long time afterward, trying to process what had just happened. Even though I now knew this was sleep paralysis, the memory of seeing her face, the hazy, unmovable sensation, stayed with me. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced, a haunting mixture of grief, fear, and the unexplainable power of the mind in that strange, half-awake state. I've always been fascinated by dreams, how they can feel so vivid and unreal, how they create their own logic, a separate world where everything can be strange, inexplicable, and sometimes terrifying. But nothing prepared me for what happens when that dream-like eeriness bleeds into the real world. I learned this the hard way during another sleep paralysis episode. It started in the middle of REM sleep. I was having a bizarre nightmare about being chased by some strange creature through a dense forest. The trees loomed over me, their shadows twisting unnaturally as the creature followed. The dream became hazy, fragmented, until I felt myself slowly waking. But this awakening wasn't normal. I was aware of my surroundings. I was in my bedroom, but my body refused to move. It was that familiar paralysis, the helplessness of being trapped in my own skin. Then I heard it, a faint, eerie noise that I couldn't place at first. It was a robotic, almost alive sound, strange and irregular, echoing faintly in the room. It started soft, almost like a whisper, repeating every few seconds. But with each repetition, the sound grew louder, closer, more intense. My panic began to rise, my mind screaming for me to move, to scream, but my body remained unresponsive. I tried to look around, using only my eyes. That's when I noticed it, the closet door. I always kept it closed, never left it ajar. But tonight, there was a tiny crack, and through it, a face stared at me. Distorted, human-like, but twisted in a way that was profoundly unnatural. Its mouth was impossibly wide, stretched into a grotesque smile. And every time the sound pulsed, it seemed like the face was getting closer, as if the darkness itself was creeping toward me. The noise became unbearable, rattling my skull, and my heart raced as though trying to escape my chest. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but only tiny, ineffective sounds escaped, grunts and gasps that did nothing. The face in the closet and the eerie sound seemed synchronized, closing in, pressing on me from all sides. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the closet door slammed shut. Silence. Complete and crushing silence. I regained control of my body immediately after. The first thing I did, despite being 24 years old, was run to my parents' room, frantically asking my dad to check the closet. But there was nothing. No face, no sound, nothing. The room was empty, normal, silent. My dad, calm but slightly amused, told me I had likely experienced sleep paralysis. He admitted he'd had a similar experience once. But his words did nothing to soothe me. I had seen something in the darkness, something unexplainable, and the memory of it stayed with me long after that night. The terrifying part wasn't just the paralysis or the creature. It was the way my mind could make something so unreal feel undeniably real. I lay awake long after, replaying the sound, the face, the closeness over and over in my mind. Sleep paralysis had shown me the unsettling bridge between dreams and reality, a place where the mind can conjure horrors that feel utterly tangible. After years of experiencing sleep paralysis, I've come to a tentative understanding of it. It's terrifying, yes, but it's also fascinating, a window into the mysterious workings of the mind. Those nights of paralysis, the grotesque figures, the floating heads, the distorted family visions, and the unexplainable sounds, they were all terrifying, but they were also glimpses into the strange interface between sleep, consciousness, and fear. The first time I experienced it was in college, stressed and exhausted. Finals week had drained me, and I hadn't slept properly for days. That night, after a long evening of studying for my biology final, I finally collapsed into bed. At some point, I drifted off, but when I awoke, I was trapped in a half-awake, half-asleep state. My body refused to move. I could only move my eyes, scanning the dark room. That's when I saw her. A woman in a black dress, standing at the center of the room, holding some long objects. I tried to call out, "Mom," but my voice was gone. When she came closer and touched my forehead, her face transformed into my mother's. My mother had passed away just 3 weeks before. That memory still lingers vividly, even now. Sleep paralysis has a way of magnifying emotions, of blending grief, fear, and imagination into something almost tangible. Over the years, I've had multiple episodes, each more intense and surreal than the last. One night, a floating head emerged from the shadows at the foot of my bed. Another morning, my family appeared taller than life, crying and looming over me. Each incident left me gasping, trembling, and questioning what was real. Even with all the logical explanations, REM sleep, the paralysis of the body, the brain misfiring during transitions between sleep and wakefulness, the experiences felt real at the time. The terror was real, the emotions were real, and the sensations were as vivid as any waking moment. But over time, I've learned to accept these experiences. I've learned to recognize the signs, to breathe through the panic, and to remind myself that while the mind can conjure terrifying visions, they are ultimately illusions. Sleep paralysis has taught me a lot about fear, the mind, and the delicate balance between sleep and consciousness. It's an experience that is as horrifying as it is fascinating. I may never fully understand why it happens or why it manifests in such vivid, sometimes predictive ways, but I do know that it has given me a glimpse into the power of the human mind and the strange, sometimes terrifying worlds it can create when the body is asleep and the mind is awake. Even now, I approach sleep with a sense of caution and respect. I understand that my mind can create horrors that feel indistinguishably real, but I also respect the resilience of consciousness, the ability to regain control, to awaken fully, and to recognize the illusions for what they are. Sleep paralysis is a terrifying reminder of our vulnerability, but also of our capacity to endure and to reflect upon the mysteries of the mind. Many years ago, I had another sleep paralysis experience, one that remains burned into my memory. That night, I was certain something evil was hiding inside my closet. I could feel its presence, even though I couldn't see it clearly. But strangely, a part of me knew I was dreaming. I told myself, face it, don't be afraid, it's not real. I wanted to confront my fear, to look straight at the thing lurking behind the closet door. But when I tried, I realized I couldn't even move my head. My body was frozen in place. I could only control my eyes, but whenever I tried to look directly at the closet, my head seemed to turn away on its own, as if some invisible force refused to let me see it. The fear was suffocating. Every breath felt heavier, my chest tight with panic. Then suddenly, I woke up. At least I thought I did. I sat there drenched in sweat, heart pounding in relief that it was over. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light of my room, I realized with creeping dread that it wasn't a dream. I was still paralyzed, still unable to move, and the presence in the closet was still there. Then I heard it, not with my ears, but deep inside my mind. A horrible, sickening laughter. It didn't sound human. It wasn't loud, but I could feel it vibrating through my body, washing over me like waves of nausea. The laughter came from the closet, closer and closer. My heart raced violently, my body screaming to wake up, but I couldn't. I could only stare, trembling internally, as the door slowly began to creak open. And then, without warning, something flew out from the darkness, a human head. It landed on my chest with a heavy thud, face up. I froze in absolute terror. It was the face of a girl I knew from high school. Her eyes were open, lifeless, staring into mine. That was the moment I broke. I couldn't scream, couldn't speak. All that came out were horrible grunting sounds as I struggled and twisted, trying to shake it off. But the head wouldn't move. My body refused to obey. It was like being buried alive inside my own skin. This lasted what felt like an eternity, though it was probably just a minute or two. Then, as suddenly as it began, I woke up for real, gasping, drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I sat upright in my bed, staring at the closet, terrified that it might open again. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep peacefully. Every time I woke up, I feared I wasn't truly awake, that any second I'd hear that laughter again. I hadn't even heard of sleep paralysis back then. I thought I was going insane, that something evil had truly visited me that night. Even now, years later, just thinking about that laughter makes my skin crawl. I've experienced sleep paralysis a total of 3 times in my life. The first 2 were frightening, but relatively simple. They consisted mainly of waking up and being unable to move my body. My mind would be alert, fully aware, but my body would not respond. Those episodes were terrifying, yes, but manageable. They passed quickly, leaving me shaken but unharmed. The third time, however, was completely different. I woke up very early in the morning, probably between 5 and 6 a.m., just as the sun was beginning to rise. There was barely any light in the room, a soft, fragile glow filtering through the curtains. I tried to move my body, but once again, I was trapped. That familiar, frustrating sensation of paralysis settled over me like a heavy blanket. I was helpless, aware of everything, yet unable to act. I fixed my gaze on the wall, trying to remain calm, but then I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, approaching from the stairs of my bedroom. My heart jumped into my throat. At first, I thought maybe it was a family member waking up early, But as the footsteps grew closer, something felt very wrong. Then I saw them, my family, but not as I knew them. My brother, my sister, my mom, and my dad appeared at the top of the stairs, crying hysterically. They were all unnaturally tall, at least a foot taller than usual, their figures looming over me like giants. My heart pounded harder as they slowly approached my bed. Their faces were wet with tears, mouths open in anguish, yet the sight terrified me more than comforted me. They stopped right at the edge of my bed, towering above me, crying in silence. I wanted to cry out, to tell them to stop, to scream for help, but my body remained paralyzed. I could barely even breathe, every inhale sharp and shallow. The combination of their immense size, their emotional intensity, and my helplessness created a surreal nightmare that I couldn't escape. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they turned and walked back down the stairs. My body regained control immediately. I leapt out of bed and ran after them, desperate, but the hallway was empty. I checked each room. My parents were asleep, my siblings too. The entire house was silent, as if nothing had ever happened. My heart raced uncontrollably as I tried to gather my thoughts. The experience had been so vivid, so tangible, that it felt as if it had really occurred. Even as I leaned against the wall trying to catch my breath, I couldn't shake the image of them towering over me. It was the most unnerving, surreal, and terrifying moment of sleep paralysis I had ever faced. That morning, sleep was impossible. The sun finally rose fully, filling the room with light, but my mind remained restless. The memory of my family, distorted and immense, haunted me for days. Sleep paralysis was no longer just a strange phenomenon. It had become a psychological battle, one where the mind could trap you, distort reality, and leave you questioning everything around you. That strange morning lingered in my memory, long after the sun had come up. I couldn't stop replaying what I had seen. My family crying, their unnaturally tall bodies, the eerie silence that followed when they turned away. It didn't feel like an ordinary hallucination. It felt like something else. A warning, maybe. For the next few nights, I was too afraid to sleep deeply. Every time I began to drift off, I feared that paralysis would return. But even though I tried to fight it, exhaustion eventually took over. And then, a few days later, something happened that would change how I saw that dream forever. I was crossing the street with a few of my friends, laughing and talking, when suddenly a car came speeding around the corner. There wasn't even time to react. I remember the screech of tires, the blinding flash of headlights, and then impact. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by pain and confusion. I had 3 broken bones and a fractured thigh bone. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. As I lay there recovering, I looked up one day and saw my family standing beside my hospital bed. My mother crying, my father holding her shoulder, my brother and sister standing quietly behind. And in that moment, a cold realization hit me like a wave. It was the same image I had seen during my sleep paralysis. The same scene, the same positions, the same expressions. Only this time, it was real. I felt chills run through my entire body. That night, weeks before the accident, I had seen something that hadn't yet happened. I don't believe in the supernatural. I'm not the type to think about ghosts or omens. But this was too precise to ignore. The idea that my sleep paralysis might have somehow predicted this moment unsettled me deeply. When I finally left the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I replayed that morning in my head over and over, wondering if there was some meaning behind it, some message that my mind, or something beyond it, was trying to tell me. Could sleep paralysis sometimes be more than just a glitch in the brain? Could it be a doorway into something we don't fully understand? Even now, every time I think back to that night, I get chills. The memory of my towering family, their crying faces, the soundless steps as they walked away, it all feels more like a vision than a dream. And the fact that it mirrored reality weeks later still haunts me to this day. I'm not superstitious, but if I were, I would 100% believe that what happened that morning was a sign, a premonition of what was to come. Sleep paralysis had always seemed like a terrifying trick of the mind, but that time, it felt like something much deeper, something that blurred the boundary between dreams, death, and destiny. There was another unforgettable episode a few years later during the summer of 2016. I had been out late with friends, walking through town and the nearby neighborhoods. It was a carefree night filled with laughter and casual mischief. But then something caught our attention, someone hiding in a bush just a little way off the sidewalk. My friend pointed and whispered, "Look." Curious, we all moved closer, squinting through the dim streetlights to see who or what was hiding there. The figure was barely visible, shrouded in shadow, but it moved just enough to make us feel uneasy. Then, from the bush came a sound, strange, off-putting, almost otherworldly. It wasn't a human voice, not entirely. It was unsettling enough that we screamed and laughed at the same time, running away half in fear, half in amusement. The incident left us baffled, but we assumed it was some prank or someone messing with us. That night, I fell asleep without much thought about the incident, probably due to a mix of exhaustion and the effects of drinking. But my sleep offered no relief. Instead, I found myself in one of the most vivid sleep paralysis episodes I've ever experienced. I woke up in near complete darkness, unable to move. My body was frozen, my heart pounding, and my mind fully alert. Immediately, I recognized the same bizarre noise we had heard from the bush earlier. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination. It was real, or at least it felt overwhelmingly real. Then I saw it. At the foot of my bed, a floating, grotesque head emerged from the shadows. The room was dark, but I could make out its horrific features, its face twisted, demonic, unnatural. At first, I thought it was floating, but then I realized it had a body that blended seamlessly into the darkness, making it appear as though the head was suspended in midair. Its mouth hung open wide, and it kept producing that same terrifying noise from the bush outside. The creature came closer, inch by inch, and I felt paralyzed not just physically, but mentally. My thoughts raced, panic gripping me in a way I had never known before. I wanted to scream, to throw myself off the bed, but no sound would come out. My limbs refused to obey. For what felt like minutes, I was trapped in that living nightmare, staring directly at a presence that seemed more real than anything I had ever experienced while awake. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure faded into the darkness. I could move again. I let out a loud, gasping scream and flicked on the lamp. The room was empty, silent, normal, but my body and mind were still trembling from the intensity of what I had just experienced. When I told my parents about it the next day, they nodded, confirming it was sleep paralysis. But they had never heard of anyone encountering something so grotesque. Even knowing the medical explanation didn't lessen the terror I felt. That night reminded me that sleep paralysis isn't just about being unable to move. It's about how real and horrifying your mind can make the impossible feel. Sleep paralysis had been a recurring, terrifying presence in my life, but the third incident I experienced remains the most surreal and disturbing. This one happened early in the morning, sometime between 5 and 6 a.m. The sun had just begun to rise, casting faint streaks of light into my room. I was half awake, fully aware, and yet completely trapped within my own body. My arms and legs would not move, no matter how hard I tried. The familiar helplessness of paralysis settled over me like a lead weight. I fixed my gaze on the wall, trying to remain calm, when I heard footsteps approaching from the stairs. They were heavy, deliberate, and slow, echoing unnervingly in my quiet home. My heart raced and my stomach tightened. I thought it was a family member waking up early, but something about the rhythm of the steps felt wrong, unnatural. Then they appeared, my family, but not as I knew them. My brother, my sister, my mom, and my dad were walking toward me, but each of them was unnaturally tall, at least a foot taller than their normal selves. They were crying hysterically, tears streaming down their faces. The sight, though familiar, was entirely alien. Their height, their expressions, and the intensity of their emotion created a sense of terror I couldn't explain. They stopped at the edge of my bed, towering over me, their crying faces filled with grief. I wanted to speak, to scream, to tell them to stop, but my body refused. The paralysis held me in place like chains, my mind screaming at me while my limbs remained useless. The closer they came, the more intense my fear became. I could barely breathe, my chest tight, my heartbeat thundering. And then, as abruptly as they arrived, they turned and walked back down the stairs. My body immediately regained control. I leapt out of bed, frantically following them, but the house was empty. Every room was quiet, everyone asleep. The surreal vision I had just witnessed had vanished. My heart raced, adrenaline coursing through me, and I leaned against the wall to steady my trembling body. Even after I calmed down, the image stayed with me. Their tears, the unnatural height, the silent cries, it all felt more real than a dream. I couldn't stop thinking about the connection between what I saw and what would happen later. It felt like a warning or a premonition, though I'm not the type to believe in the supernatural. Sleep paralysis had become more than a terrifying neurological event. It felt like a glimpse into something deeper, a mysterious intersection of mind and reality. For hours, I lay awake, unable to sleep. The sunlight eventually filled the room, but my mind remained restless, replaying the vision of my family over and over. The haunting intensity of that experience reminded me that sleep paralysis isn't just about immobility. It's about the strange, unexplainable visions the mind can conjure, and the power they have to make the unreal feel absolutely real. Even after that early morning experience, sleep paralysis remained a haunting presence in my life. Each episode seemed to blur the lines between dreams and reality, leaving me questioning whether what I saw was purely a trick of my mind or something more. One incident, in particular, left me shaken in a way that still lingers whenever I think about it. A few days after the terrifying vision of my family, I was walking with friends through the neighborhood on a warm summer night. We had been drinking, laughing, and enjoying the carefree atmosphere. As we strolled along, one of my friends noticed something moving in a bush nearby. "Look," he whispered. Curious, we all leaned closer to see. The figure was barely visible, cloaked in shadow and completely still. As we approached, a strange, unnerving sound emerged from the bush. It was unnatural, part human, part mechanical, like some twisted, robotic laugh. The combination of fear and absurdity made us scream, laugh, and run all at once. It was terrifying, but also bizarrely funny, and we quickly dispersed to our respective homes, trying to brush it off. I fell asleep that night without thinking too much about this strange encounter, only to experience another intense bout of sleep paralysis shortly afterward. I woke up in almost complete darkness, my body frozen, my mind fully alert. The first thing I noticed was that familiar, horrifying sound, the same one we had heard from the bush. It resonated through my skull, sending waves of panic through my body. Then, at the foot of my bed, I saw it. A grotesque, floating head stared at me, its features distorted and horrifying. At first, I thought it was hovering, but soon realized it had a body, blending seamlessly with the blackness of my room. Its mouth remained open, repeating that unnerving sound. I was trapped, unable to move, unable to scream. My body refused to obey, and my mind raced with terror. Every pulse of the sound seemed to push the creature closer, inch by inch, until it loomed just inches from my face. The sense of helplessness, the vividness of the vision, and the intensity of the sound created an experience so real that I questioned whether I was awake at all. Then, suddenly, it vanished. The room returned to silence, and I could move again. I screamed, turned on the lamp, and checked every corner of the room. There was nothing, just the empty bedroom. My parents later confirmed it was sleep paralysis, though they had never heard of anyone seeing something so horrifying. That night reinforced a chilling realization. Sleep paralysis doesn't just freeze your body, it allows your mind to create scenes that feel indistinguishably real. It blurs the line between waking and dreaming, between reality and nightmare. Even now, recalling the sound, the floating head, and the intense paralysis gives me goosebumps. The experiences were terrifying, yes, but they also revealed the strange, powerful connection between our mind, fear, and the subconscious, showing me that the unreal can sometimes feel far more tangible than reality itself. Sleep paralysis had already left a deep mark on my life, but the lingering fear it created often felt even more intense than the episodes themselves. After the floating head incident, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings every night. Even in the light of day, the memory of the grotesque figure haunted me. I knew logically that it was my mind playing tricks, a neurological phenomenon caused by REM sleep, yet the fear felt entirely real. Weeks passed, and I tried to resume normal life. I went to work, hung out with friends, and kept myself busy to avoid dwelling on the terrifying experiences. But sleep paralysis has a way of staying with you. I found myself double-checking locks, staring at dark corners, and hesitating to close my eyes at night. My imagination became a dangerous playground, each shadow or creak in the house potentially a lurking horror. Then came a night that reminded me just how real the mind's power can be during these episodes. I was lying in bed, exhausted, finally drifting off after a long day. My body froze again. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. Panic rose quickly in my chest. And then I heard it, soft footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the hallway. My eyes darted around, struggling to focus in the dim light of my room. Out of the shadows, figures appeared, my family once again. But this time, they were closer to their normal height, yet the expressions on their faces were twisted with sorrow and desperation. They stopped at the edge of my bed, silently weeping. I wanted to call out to them, to reach for them, but my voice was trapped inside me. The helplessness was suffocating. They lingered for what felt like minutes, then slowly receded into the darkness of the hallway, vanishing as suddenly as they had appeared. My body immediately regained function, and I bolted upright, heart pounding, struggling to catch my breath. I ran through the house, checking each room. Everyone was asleep, normal. Nothing had happened, and yet I was left shaken to my core. Even after years of experiencing sleep paralysis, the terror never completely subsided. The episodes were unpredictable, the visions vivid, and the sense of helplessness profound. The mind is capable of creating sensations so real that they blur the boundary between reality and nightmare. Sleep paralysis had taught me a difficult lesson. Fear doesn't just exist in the dark. It lives in the spaces between dreams and waking, in the moments when the mind is awake but the body refuses to respond. I lay in bed for hours that night, unable to return to sleep. The memories of past episodes returned, each one sharper than the last, each one reminding me of the fragility of perception and the strange, haunting power of the subconscious mind. It was terrifying, and yet, despite it all, I couldn't help but be fascinated by it. After years of experiencing sleep paralysis, I've come to a tentative understanding of it. It's terrifying, yes, but it's also fascinating, a window into the mysterious workings of the mind. Those nights of paralysis, the grotesque figures, the floating heads, the distorted family visions, and the unexplainable sounds, they were all terrifying, but they were also glimpses into the strange interface between sleep, consciousness, and fear. The first time I experienced it was in college, stressed and exhausted. Finals week had drained me, and I hadn't slept properly for days. That night, after a long evening of studying for my biology final, I finally collapsed into bed. At some point, I drifted off, but when I awoke, I was trapped in a half-awake, half-asleep state. My body refused to move. I could only move my eyes, scanning the dark room. That's when I saw her. A woman in a black dress, standing at the center of the room, holding some long objects. I tried to call out, "Mom," but my voice was gone. When she came closer and touched my forehead, her face transformed into my mother's. My mother had passed away just 3 weeks before. That memory still lingers vividly, even now. Sleep paralysis has a way of magnifying emotions, of blending grief, fear, and imagination into something almost tangible. Over the years, I've had multiple episodes, each more intense and surreal than the last. One night, a floating head emerged from the shadows at the foot of my bed. Another morning, my family appeared taller than life, crying and looming over me. Each incident left me gasping, trembling, and questioning what was real. Even with all the logical explanations, REM sleep, the paralysis of the body, the brain misfiring during transitions between sleep and wakefulness, the experiences felt real at the time. The terror was real, the emotions were real, and the sensations were as vivid as any waking moment. But over time, I've learned to accept these experiences. I've learned to recognize the signs, to breathe through the panic, and to remind myself that while the mind can conjure terrifying visions, they are ultimately illusions. Sleep paralysis has taught me a lot about fear, the mind, and the delicate balance between sleep and consciousness. It's an experience that is as horrifying as it is fascinating. I may never fully understand why it happens or why it manifests in such vivid, sometimes predictive ways, but I do know that it has given me a glimpse into the power of the human mind and the strange, sometimes terrifying worlds it can create when the body is asleep and the mind is awake. Even now, I approach sleep with a sense of caution and respect. I understand that my mind can create horrors that feel indistinguishably real, but I also respect the resilience of consciousness, the ability to regain control, to awaken fully, and to recognize the illusions for what they are. Sleep paralysis is a terrifying reminder of our vulnerability, but also of our capacity to endure and to reflect upon the mysteries of the mind.